30 seconds. All right. The boys. You guys. What did you guys say? So what's suffering? Why injustice? Why is it an injustice? Yeah, go. Yep, very good. So when you go through trials, emotionally, spiritually, and physically, and it what? Challenges your comfort. All right. Why can it be an injustice? Or someone else, maybe, Mark. It's all good, all good. Yeah. Yeah, the suffering's like cancer, and the justice was. Yeah. Yeah, very good. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. So we have issues when it seems that someone who doesn't deserve suffering, like a child, we have a big problem with that. So if an adult at the age of 80 gets cancer, it's kind of all good. Why? All right, yeah, it's kind of all good because they've lived their life, okay? And by the end of their life, okay, the expectation is that, you know, soon they're going to die. So getting cancer at 80, we're kind of okay with that. Then we hear about a child either being born with cancer or a child passing away from cancer at a young age. Then there's a problem. Now it's an injustice. A lot of the times when you go to a funeral of an old person, I now go to a lot of funerals, what you see is that when it's an old person, they're usually like, oh, it's okay, you know, she was suffering a lot, or he was suffering a lot at the end of her life. And then when it's someone it's young, it's a tragedy. And it's why God? Okay, so we'll talk more about that. But I want to hear from you girls. What did you girls say? Yeah. Yeah. What we seem to have the issue with is perceived innocence. All right. Some people, it's okay for them to suffer. Some people, perceived innocence is not okay. Usually the big one is, of course, young people. All right. Did anyone mention animals? Anyone mention animals? You mentioned animals? No, you didn't. Depending on the type of person, usually the people will always say another injustice of suffering is animals, because they have absolutely, you know, no sense of reason, no sense of morality. So why should they suffer? Anyone else want to share what they spoke about? There's another question. Okay, so if you want to move on. But I want to talk about that. So there seems to be, the reason why we think suffering is an injustice is because there seems to be this presupposition, right? We seem to presuppose that, you know, a sort of karma system. Good people shouldn't suffer. Innocent people shouldn't suffer. Okay? Innocent people shouldn't suffer. It's okay for a lot older people to suffer. It's okay for certain people to suffer. Maybe they're bad people. All right? And for some reason, we judge Christianity by this lens of a kind of karma system. Good people shouldn't suffer, bad people should suffer. Where did we get that from? Definitely not the Bible. There is nowhere in the Bible that promises that a good person should not suffer. There is nowhere in the Bible that promises that if you are a good person, or if you're young, if you're a child, if you're innocent, you will not experience suffering. So I don't know where we get the idea, all right? Although this is logical, right? It is logical to say that a child suffering is injustice. That is logical. I would be worried if you don't believe it's an injustice. But it is not the lens by which we can judge our faith, because that is not a promise that God has made to us. God has not made that. He has not said that in the innocence of a child they are not allowed to suffer, or He said in our goodness we are not allowed to suffer. Okay, rather He says the opposite. It is the expectation of Christianity is that we will suffer. Good people will suffer. But logically, we are all okay with accepting the fact that, to an extent, certain sufferings is an injustice. This is the next question, and I want you to talk to the person next to you. When is suffering acceptable / just? When is suffering acceptable? Don't use my example. I want you to think completely different. So when is suffering acceptable / just? Talk to the person next to you and I'll give you like 2 minutes. Let's go. Talk to the person next to you. Ask them that question. If there's no one next to you, look to the closest person. One more minute. "30 seconds. It's fake counting. That's what I used to do as a teacher. Absolute fake counting. It's time based off energy. Don't count at all. Just watch. All right. We are going to start with Ilaria because she looks like she's very into it. Tell me what you guys spoke about. Such a Sunday school answer. Such a Sunday school answer. Oh my God. But that's what we're going to get to at the end. You jumped the gun. That's the end. No, it's all good. It's all good. No, of course. Anna, Simone and Mariam, what do you guys talk about? Yeah. Ooh. That's interesting. That's very interesting. Okay. Mariam, did you agree with that? Is that what you said? What did you say, Mariam? Yeah, of course, it is hard. Yeah. But you said something interesting there. You said when a kid gets cancer, it is the will of God, and we just have to ask why. Is that what you said? Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. Anyone else on that? Any other aspects of when suffering is acceptable? Just I want you to remove the spiritual aspect, all right? Because it seems like obviously we're all giving the spiritual answer, and we're from a church perspective. When do we, as a society, as secular society, accept suffering and say, yeah, it's okay, it's just for the greater good? Yes, very good. Can anyone give me an example of that? Thank you, Abouna. Huh? Terrorists. So what do you say? Killing a terrorist. So if we like capital punishment for a terrorist. So are you guys all good with capital punishment? You guys are all good with capital punishment? No, I'm genuinely asking. What was that good point? You said that was a good point. Yeah, what was your good point? What was your name, sorry? Michael? Yeah, what was your good point? Sorry? Yeah, that's a very good point. No, that's a very good point. I actually really want to, that's one of the points that I wanted to bring up. For example, suffering at the gym, that's kind of a requirement. Usually we say, we think of suffering and we think of, thanks for bringing up that point. We think of suffering and we think that it is holistically bad. Across the board, suffering can never be good, right? But yet, if you're not suffering at the gym, you're being useless. So there are actually moments in your life when suffering is a requirement and suffering is actually a measure of success. Oh, I know this person suffers at the gym. He really tears his muscles. He must be going good. I know that that person trains very hard. He's a very serious athlete based on his suffering. So I've actually valued his worth based on his suffering. The positivity of his character was determined by his suffering. Isn't that interesting? Suddenly, suffering is not an entirely bad thing. Does anyone have any other examples of accepted or expected suffering? Studying, very good. All right, we study, and studying, you know, is 9 times out of 10 not enjoyable unless you're one of the people who really love it. 9 times out of 10 it's not going to be enjoyable, but I do it for the greater good. Okay, an example I really love, and because I think it's something that you're going to experience. Everyone will experience that in their lifetime, is getting a tooth removed. You guys gotten a tooth removed? Dentist over here, yeah. Yeah, or giving birth, yeah. That's one of my, another example as well that I will talk about later. But one of them is pulling a tooth, right? Pulling a tooth. It's like, for I don't know how long it goes for, but I remember the last time I pulled a tooth, it was awful. But say it goes on for 10 minutes. Say it goes on 10, 15 minutes. For those 10, 15 minutes, okay, you are in absolutely excruciating pain. Why have you said that pain is acceptable? What is the reason for you saying that pain is acceptable in that moment? Sorry? Oh, very good. So then now suffering is not bad. So this idea that holistically suffering is bad, it's not true. There is a threshold. We have a threshold of acceptance. And my threshold of acceptance is entirely based off of the fact that, is there a greater good or is there not? So when I determine that the suffering of a child is injustice, it's because I have weighed up the greater good and I have said the greater good cannot be acceptable to justify this suffering. Now it becomes an equation. Our understanding of suffering is an equation. And this is across the board for all societies. Every single society accepts that pulling a tooth is acceptable suffering. No one puts a dentist on blast and says this guy's a terrorist because he's caused us suffering. No, he hasn't. Yes, he does. Dentists, I was really afraid of dentists when I was a kid. Dentists cause a lot of pain. But it is okay because there's relief at the end. Okay, it is okay because there's relief at the end. And in some cases, in the example of gym and athleticism, okay, suffering is an expectation. So this is very important. I want you guys to remember this. There is a clear justification for suffering depending on the outcome, all right, and we have a threshold of acceptance. I want you to remember that. So we are happy to accept a certain amount of suffering as long as we know that the outcome or the greater good or the overall result will be good. Are we all on the same page there? Yep? Yes. Everyone. Secular and Christian. Yes. Yes, exactly. No, not talking on the individual level. I'm saying we as a society, we as a whole, we as human beings, we do not say that all suffering is bad, although initially when we think of suffering, it has such a negative connotation that the assumption is that suffering is bad, we never want suffering. However, we as a society, there is this unspoken rule that certain types of suffering are okay. The suffering of a mother in childbirth is entirely okay. The suffering of an operation is entirely okay. The suffering of getting your arm fixed because it was broken is okay. Why? Because the outcome is better than staying with the pain. Pulling a tooth, okay, and being in excruciating pain for 10 minutes is perfectly okay because I know there will be a relief. And we've all agreed on that as a society. But then we come and say that certain things have to be injustice, certain sufferings have to be injustice, all because I can't see the greater good. You see? Yep. No, I wouldn't say that's where the division is. I'll say that's another example. That's an example of people who have different ideas on suffering. They feel that they are suffering because they are victimized, and that's okay. Suffering, it's not on us to decide who's suffering and who's not in suffering. I could be standing right here and I'm suffering. You might not know. I'm sitting down right now, I'm suffering. You might not know. It is not your job to tell me that whether or not I'm suffering. Okay? So I'm not talking about what we determine as suffering or not. What I'm saying is what we say is acceptable or justified suffering. Okay? Once again, I will go back to the example of an innocent child dying. An innocent child dying, once again, is very sad. No one here would be like, oh, the outcome's better. Okay? You're not going to say that to a person. Yeah, we might say, yeah, they went to heaven, it's all right. But you're not okay with that suffering. But if I say, hey, I got my teeth removed and I was in pain for 3 hours until it was pulled out, you'd be like, oh, yeah, good on you, sounds good. All right? We're okay with that. All right? So there's levels. There's levels, and then we hit a threshold when, no, I'm not happy with the suffering anymore. And then there are parts where we say, no, we're okay with the suffering. Okay? All right? So as long as it seems to be a greater good, then it turns out that suffering is okay. And why am I mentioning that? Let's first make some distinctions on what suffering actually is. You have to make this distinction, because I feel like we have a misconstrued idea of what suffering actually is. So you can see that suffering is man-made, stemming from disobedience. I wrote that in caps lock because I'm yelling it. It's very important. All right? Suffering is not something that is, in and of itself, good. It is man-made. What do we mean by that? God did not create suffering and said, yeah, get some suffering in you. Yeah, suffer. God is not watching you. Please don't have this idea. This is really important. Please do not have this idea that when you are suffering and you are in your lowest moments and you are in pain, God is watching over you and being like, yeah, just suffer a bit more. Yeah, I love it when you suffer. Great. No. That is not the case. And at times we might fall into that trap. We as Christians who are coming and reading Bible verses like we hear, count it all joy when you fall into sufferings, we might mistakenly, because that's not how it's meant to be read, we might mistakenly glorify suffering as something that is innately good. That is definitely not the case. Suffering is objectively and in its essence bad. What does the liturgy of St. Gregory say? I plucked for myself the sentence of death. We brought suffering into this world. Suffering is a direct consequence of death entering into the world, and it was not a part of the original plan of God. God did not create Adam and Eve in the garden and said, you're going to suffer. And I'm going to watch it and it's going to be all good. Because suffering is good. No. Suffering is something that we brought into. Out of our own free will, I plucked for myself the sentence of death. Now the sentence of death comes with consequences. Death comes with disease, comes with ailments, comes with brokenness. And then go down and down into suffering. Okay? Suffering is a product of death. Death is objectively incompatible with our state of existence, our being as a man. Which is why Christ came down to fix that. Okay? So death and suffering is incompatible with the overall purpose of our existence. Alright? That's very important. So, we do not glorify suffering. We don't glorify suffering. We don't look at a Christian who is suffering, even the martyrs, and we don't say, it's so amazing that they suffered. But we know that there is glory in suffering. We say it is amazing that they suffered and they did not deny Christ. Their suffering in and of itself is not good. Please do not glorify suffering. We never want to glorify suffering, because suffering is an objectively bad thing. Suffering is the reason. Suffering and death is the reason that Christ had to come down and also suffer. So we all have to be on the same page in that regard. Suffering is not something that is good. It is something unnatural that we brought into our existence and we brought into the state of man, and it's not a part of God's original plan for us. Always to emphasize, I plucked for myself the sentence of death, which comes with suffering. Any questions or disagreements on that? All right. So then in that case, why then would I allow suffering? Why then is God going to allow suffering? All right. Suffering now, originally it wasn't meant to be. Suffering now is a natural part of our existence as men, as human beings. It's a natural part of our existence as men. Okay? And it's actually a natural part of our spiritual journey. And through our acceptance of suffering, not our glorification of sufferings, through our acceptance of suffering, we will be free from suffering. Through the acceptance of the kingdom through coming to Christ. I want you to understand something, however, that Christ does not take pleasure in suffering, and Christ, when he suffered as well, did not enjoy it. But listen, there's something also beautiful about Christ and his understanding of suffering. When Christ when Christ, the shortest verse in the Bible, what is it? We all know it. Jesus wept. All right? Jesus wept. Let's look at the context of that. But it is not, therefore, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came, this is in the story of Lazarus. He saw everyone weeping. Therefore, when he saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her weeping, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. He groaned in the spirit and was troubled when he saw everyone weeping. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, and this is a mistake, "See how he loved him." Was Jesus in that moment crying over Lazarus? That's what they thought. Why would he cry over Lazarus? He's about to resurrect him. Literally, like what? Within 10 minutes, he's about to resurrect him. Was he crying over their lack of faith? Is it a lack of faith to think that Jesus was going to resurrect something knowing that he hadn't done that before? What is he actually crying about? Suffering. He's weeping with those who weep, because when we suffer, he's suffering. He bore our pain, meaning when we are in pain, he is also in pain. And then that becomes vice versa, right? And then when I'm in pain, I share in the suffering of Christ. And it's a cycle. And that's very beautiful. And we're going to get to that in a moment. But it was not his love for Lazarus that made him weep. Rather, it was his empathy. True love is this. When I see my brother weeping, when I see my son weeping, when I see my daughter weeping, how can I not weep? For when I'm in love with that person, when I have true unconditional love for them, their pain is my pain and their joy is my joy. And we have to understand that about Christ. So Christ and God is not a God who's up there being like, yeah, he's not a coach that's saying, yeah, just a bit more suffering and then you do it. When we are suffering, he is also suffering. I want to give the example once again. I want to give the example of a dentist. Okay, the dentist and a parent. I want you to imagine this. A dentist is pulling a tooth from a child, and he tells the parent, "Hey, could you come and hold down your son? All right, hold down your son while I pull this tooth." Do you still do that? Okay, good, because that's what happened to me as a kid. So one time I had my. This is why I give this example. One time when I was really young, I think I was like 12 or 10. Yeah, I'm very traumatized. 7. That's another thing we're going to talk about, trauma. No, I think I was like 6 or 7. And I had my tooth pulled without anesthesia or something. I don't know. Anyways, the lady was like, told my mum, "Come hold me down," or something. Anyways, but I don't remember the rest of it. But I want you to put yourself in that situation, right? You as a parent, imagine you're holding down your child while their tooth is getting pulled, okay? And that's excruciating pain. In that moment, what are you going to be feeling? You're going to be deeply, deeply uncomfortable. You're going to hate it. You're going to be in serious pain. You watch your child in pain and you will be in pain, but you are allowing it. Right? You're allowing it. Why are you allowing it? That's your child. Your child's in pain. Why are you okay with holding him down and watching him be in excruciating pain, or watching her be in excruciating pain? For their own good, right? Because you know objectively there is a positive outcome. So I will suffer the pain with them and they will suffer the pain, but together we will suffer the pain knowing that there is a good result. And that is exactly, that's our parents who love us imperfectly. You as a parent as well, I don't know if any of you are parents, but you as a parent as well will love your children in that way, and that will give you a lot of pain if you're ever in that situation, God forbid. But your love isn't even as great as God's love for us. So how much more is God then suffering when he sees us suffer? But why is he allowing it? Why is he allowing it? Because he knows that there is goodness that can come out of it. God loves you more than your parents could ever love you, and more than you as a parent can ever love. So if I know that my parents would suffer to see me suffer, how much more is God suffering to see me suffer? But why is he allowing it? Because he knows that everything will be okay. So I've got a son, he just turned 1 recently. And more than anything, like my entire day, all right, the goodness of my day and the most important thing for me is seeing him happy. To me, that is everything. To me, that is everything. When I look at him and he is happy, there is no, like the joy of that is beautiful. And then when I see him in pain, I'm in pain. There's absolutely no two ways about it. Right? And now, a lot of, and this happens to a lot of parents, right? A lot of their day-to-day life starts to become, how can I make my child happy? All right? Because to see them happy, more than anything, that gives them true joy. And it's not the joy of when you're actually happy. It's stronger than that. Okay? And that is just the love of a fallible parent. Okay? And because I love my son so much, the only instance in which, okay, I would be okay with him suffering is when I am sure, when I am certain that the suffering has a good reason, that the suffering will yield a greater result. Okay? Exact same thing with childbirth. Someone brought up childbirth. And I remember being in the delivery room with my wife. The pain is immense, of course. And you as a husband, you're there watching, and there's not much you can do, but you are in pain, of course. The empathy there is like, you're in pain, but why are we okay with it, knowing that joy will come when the child is born? All right? As the Bible verse says, weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. Are we all on the page? Are we all on the same page with that? So suffering in Christ, it's very important to understand that empathy is love. To feel the pain of another person is love. To weep with those who are weep, to weep with those who weep is love. To be joyful with those who are joyful, that is love. All right? But I want to ask you, I want to ask you guys, what does it mean to be a Christian? What are we endeavoring to be when we are being Christians? Just yell it out. What does it mean to be a Christian? You think this is an easy question? What does it mean to be a Christian? Sorry? Yeah, to be Christ-like, very good. All right. But do we want to be like Christ, like just a bit like Christ? Do we just want to be slightly inspired by Christ? Okay, to bring others closer to God, but in the way we do that? Okay. Sorry? To carry his cross. Okay, very good. Yeah, now you're jumping the gun, you're reading this. Once again, second time, by the way. Third time, you're out. Okay. All right, no. So, it is not okay, it is not sufficient, for you as a Christian to simply be inspired by Christ. It is not okay to just be a fan of Christ. It is not okay to just say, I'll be slightly, hello. Good see. It is not all right to just say, I'm interested in Christ. What we are actually trying to do is to become Christ. All right, we are trying to put on the whole body of Christ. And even in Corinthians, it says that we behold like as in a mirror the glory of our Lord. So we should be the mirror image of Christ, right? So what does that mean? And then this Bible verse that was given, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his suffering. Oh, hang on. Fellowship of his suffering. So in the previous slide, we were speaking about Christ watching us suffer and God watching us suffer. But now what we're understanding is that actually I have to share in the suffering of Christ. Part of my purpose as a Christian is to share in the suffering of Christ. Now, are we okay with that? Because if our Christianity is predicated on the fact that, everything will be all good, then you're not actually endeavoring to be Christian. Your goal as a Christian is to be Christ. And to be Christ means to share in the fellowship of his sufferings, to have a fellowship with his suffering. And it's that acceptance. To accept the fact that when I suffer, actually what's happening is that I am empathizing with my Lord who suffered, and he's also empathizing with me, and there's a cycle. And then I become closer to him. Because what did Jesus say? Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Very hard. And I think this is logically very hard to accept. All right, but there's hope. But we have to understand that this is the goal. Because no one can be Christian and say, I'm just going to take that part. Or, I'm just a fan of Christ, but I don't want to be Christ, or I don't want to be like Christ. No, you got to take 100% of it. It reminds me of a story. I remember, any teachers here? I know you're a teacher. Yeah. Any other teachers? Oh, yeah, sorry. Okay. So I was an English teacher beforehand. And the teachers will know, like, teaching is, especially in the first few years, is a grueling job. Abouna doesn't agree. Well, your teacher would.
She told me she went to school visiting, so only haram.
Yeah, I was a bad student as well. Yeah, exactly. So, so teaching, especially in the first year, and if you work at a private school, it's a lot harder than if you work at a public school. So in the first few years as a teacher, you work at a public school? Oh, okay. I didn't work at a Coptic school. The stream, brother, the stream. So I remember one of my work friends, within the first few years, it was just obviously disastrous. It was an extremely hard job, and the exec team had absolutely no idea what was happening, and there was a disconnect. And we're really all suffering, right? The typical stuff of what happens in the classroom. Don't want to make it a rant on teaching, but I loved being a teacher. By the way, I didn't want to leave. But in the first year, it was a bit hard. And I remember this is a very silly example, but you see where I'm going at with you. I remember I had this colleague who also was in the thick of it and also struggling with this job. And I remember every day at the end of the day we'd come together and we'd talk about, what did you struggle with today? And she would say, oh, this is what I struggled with today. I struggled with this. And then we got closer and closer and closer. I remember we kept on joking that, hey, what's happening is that we're only getting closer because we're trauma bonding, right? And what's really nice about that, right? What's really... Yeah, I love my job right before I left. What's funny about that is that trauma bonding, yeah, it's a silly term, but it's actually deeply psychological, right? When we share in the sufferings of each other, when I can empathize with the person next to me, I naturally get close to that person. When I can share in the sufferings of Christ, I naturally get close to Christ. When I can share in the sufferings of Christ, I naturally get close to Christ. That's why, if you trauma bond with your work friends, the chances are you're going to be very close. Similar thing. In saying that, do we think that's a requirement? So I don't think I've actually given any talk without mentioning St. Isaac the Syrian. So once again, I'm mentioning St. Isaac the Syrian. This is a long quote. I want you to bear with me with this quote. But it's a tricky quote. Okay? Whenever in your path you find unchanging peace, beware. Beware. You are very far from the divine paths trodden by the weary feet of the saints. For as long as you are journeying in the way to the city of the kingdom and are drawing nigh to the city of God, this will be a sign for you. The strength of the temptations that you encounter. And the nearer you draw nigh and progress, the more temptations will multiply against you. Whenever, therefore, you perceive in your soul diverse and stronger temptations in your path, know that at the time your soul has in fact secretly entered a new and higher level, and that grace has been added to her in the state wherein she was found. For God leads the soul into the afflictions of trials in exact proportion to the magnitude of the grace he bestows. So there's a lot there. I'll break it down into 3 points. The first one is, if there's absolutely no suffering, if you're absolutely absolute peace, and what we mean by peace, not the peace that comes from Christ. Everything's just easy going, smooth sailing, spiritually, physically, mentally. Chances are you're not walking on the path that the saints walked on. Chances are you're not walking on the same path that the saints walked on. Okay? What does St. Isaac the Syrian say? He says that when you notice an increase in the struggles and the suffering and the temptation, you are getting closer to Christ. You're getting closer to Christ, and know that you are drawing nigh to the kingdom. So therefore, whenever you perceive in your soul diverse and strong temptations in your path, know that at that time your soul has in fact secretly entered into a new and higher level. So we don't look at suffering and temptations and say, oh, it's just bad, okay, why is it happening to me? But we look at it as an opportunity that I'm growing and I'm getting closer. And combined with that last slide, that the closer I get with Christ and the closer I get with Him, the closer I get to Him, I share in His suffering. And do we see that in the lives of the saints? Absolutely. If you can give me one saint who had an easy life and everything was all good, start to finish, I'd be very surprised. Right? He was crucified, by the way. I'm not sure if you were. Not a fun way to go. Right? Okay. So, this is our last few points. The hope and beauty in suffering. So based on that point, what we now know is that suffering can be a way to draw us near to God. Once again, we're not glorifying suffering in itself, but we're glorifying where there is glory in suffering. Suffering can be a way to draw us near to God. A very beautiful quote from Pope Kyrillos. Pope Kyrillos, especially, I really hope, the book is amazing. The book by Father Dan, A Silent Patriarch. It really goes to the bad experiences that Pope Kyrillos experienced. Because I think sometimes we might have this idea, Pope Kyrillos, amazing saint, doing miracles every day. All right, we might forget about the parts where, no, he was suffering a lot. There was a stage in which the whole church was campaigning against him. He had bishops and priests campaigning against him. People hated him for praying. It's like this Pope is praying too much. And they hated him for that. And they spread rumors about him. And they said he's performing black magic. Okay? And he picked up the church in a time when the church was deeply, deeply, deeply scarred and broken. Yeah, fractured. And so he had a lot of suffering in his life. But what did he do? He used that suffering and he put it up on the altar. Okay, and the people close to him often said that they never saw him complaining. He never complained. But when he'd go up onto the altar, tears would flow and he gave everything to God. Okay? So he used his suffering as a way to draw near to God, as a way to share in the suffering of God. A very beautiful part in the three great litanies in the liturgy that we say every liturgy. We say, acquire us to yourself, O God, our Saviour, for we know none other than you, your holy name we utter. There is one of the biggest blessing in suffering, the biggest blessing in suffering is the realization, I have no one. That sounds a bit odd, right? One of the greatest realizations you can ever have when you suffer is I have no one but God. And then that reorients everything. Suddenly I need to stop looking here, I stop looking here, I stop looking at this person to solve my problem, I stop looking at this, I stop looking at the doctor, I stop looking at him. And I just look at you, look at God, and I say, for we know none other than you. I can only utter your holy name. I have no one but you. And that is a big, big blessing to finally come to that realization and to realize I have no one but you. And that is part of the blessing that it comes from suffering, because it draws us near to God. When I realize that, hey, no one can help me with my problems. I can't put my trust in princes or in men. I have to put my trust in God. And then I draw close to him and I say, I have none other than you. And that quote from Pope Kyrillos shows that. It says, rest assured and do not think too much about any matter. Leave it to God who is in control. Have you known anyone who trusted in God and was let down? Pope Kyrillos, who experienced a massive amount of suffering, never had this idea that he was ever let down. So suffering will help us grow spiritually. And there's something I just want to, just before we wrap up, something I want to emphasize is that I want you to think about your most difficult moments in your life. And I'm thinking about mine. What you'll notice about those, God willing, what you'll notice about those moments in your life is that they pointed to God. In those moments you realize that I need God. And what you might have gained in those moments when you had to call upon God, you take for the rest of your life. When I think of the most difficult moments in my life, out of absolute necessity, the way I had to turn to God has taught me things about God that has permanently impacted my relationship with Him. Thank God. So what I have gained from those hard moments, because I could only turn to God, in those extremely hard moments, I gained closeness to Him. So there was a benefit in that suffering. This is also spoken about with Paul. There's something very beautiful about in Paul in Galatians. In Galatians 2:20 he says, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. That goes back to the point we're saying. We're not trying to be inspired or fans of Christ. We're trying to be Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave Himself for me. Okay, I have been crucified with Christ. Paul wasn't crucified. What's he saying here? What he's saying is, I share now in the sufferings of Christ. And why is that beautiful? The Greek word in that context is actually, it's just written there, senastromai, which literally means to be crucified on one and the same cross. When I'm suffering, and there's nothing worse than crucifixion, right? But when I'm suffering, I'm being crucified with Christ. But if I'm crucified on the same cross with Christ, guess what? That's the closest I can ever be to Christ. Think about it, we're on that same cross. We're on the same cross together. I'm suffering and Christ is suffering, but that's the closest I'll ever be. I'm in his embrace. I'm in his embrace. And that's what St. Paul is saying. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And in that moment, that's the beauty of suffering. And there's another hope of suffering, okay? Because as we were saying before, I have to learn to accept suffering, but that might be scary. It might be scary because I can't handle suffering. What if I can't handle suffering? And then there's a hope in it, right? St. Paul says that no temptation has overtaken you except such as is common to men. What does that mean? All right? Nothing will come upon you that doesn't come to all men. It is common for all men to suffer and to experience temptation. Okay? So when you suffer, don't have this idea, why me? This is common to all men. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape that you may be able to bear it. Whatever God allows us to experience, whatever suffering God allows us to experience, he will not give us more than we are able to handle. So no, when you are experiencing a suffering and you instantly, because the human mind just wants to end suffering. In our desire for ease, which is natural, our natural response is to end suffering. The human response is to end suffering as quickly as possible. You get a headache, quick, Panadol, end the suffering. I'm in pain, quick, ease the pain, end the suffering. That's our natural inclination. What Christ is saying here is that you will not be given anything, as long as you're living with Christ, you will not be given anything that you can't handle. So next time when the suffering comes, and which it will come, don't have this response that I need to end it right now. Say that I wouldn't receive this if I wasn't able to handle it. And then you will see a newfound strength in your own soul. You will see a newfound strength. And rather your words will change. Your words will, and your mindset will shift. Not from how can I stop this to God chose me to suffer this suffering. He can see strength in me that I can't see. Trust that God sees and hears you, okay? And he's watching over you with that suffering. And he's suffering with you, but he will not allow you to experience something beyond that you are able. The final hope in suffering, and this is where we'll start to end, is that why are we as Christians okay with suffering? You never see a saint who's like, oh man, this suffering is too much. Proclus never said, I'm suffering too much, this needs to stop. We don't read about saints who say, no, the suffering's too much. They all seem to have this sense of joy, this sense of peace in their suffering. But they're suffering so much. You got St. George, you got all the martyrs. And then martyrdom is a weird one, right? Because once again, when it comes to the stories of the martyrs, our natural inclination is to stop pain. So you think of a martyr who's being tortured and he's just being told, hey, just give up your faith. All right? I know in their head they're probably thinking, yeah, I can just give it up and come back. I can give it up, ask God for forgiveness. Naturally, I just want to stop pain. All right? All right? Naturally, I just want to stop pain. Yeah, you can do that. I'm sure God's going to accept you. All right? Naturally, we just want to stop pain. What is happening in that moment for them to say, no, I can do it? Of course, God is helping them, but there's a very, very important point. The hope that is in us knowing the light of Christ makes any suffering pale in comparison. When the light of Christ is so bright that when I see his light and I taste his love, the suffering is not even comparable. That's what gives the martyrs the strength. It's not that they were able to bear the suffering by just being motivated. Yeah, I can do it. No, it's the goodness of tasting Christ and knowing that this suffering does not come close to comparison of the joy I feel with Christ. And that's what St. Paul also says once again. For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy are not worthy to be compared to the glory which shall be revealed in us. Right? I'm okay with suffering because it doesn't matter. Compared to the light of Christ, the light satiates me. I'm alright. Doesn't matter if my body is broken. The light of Christ satiates me. Doesn't matter if I'm in immense pain. The light of Christ is enough for me. That is sufficient for me. Okay? And those are the reason that the people like the martyrs were able to withstand it. Not because they had such a high pain threshold, no, but because they had such a closeness to Christ. All right? And it is their closeness to Christ that made the suffering pale in comparison to His light. As we established before, we all have a threshold of an acceptance. Okay? Now I want you to go back and think of all the injustice, the painful injustice, like the injustice suffering. If I told you about the joy of Christ and the life that will come after, that injustice is not injustice anymore. Because the hope of the resurrection, the hope of Christ who comes and fills us with His light, suddenly makes that pain all good. Doesn't matter. Yes, there's injustice. Yes, suffering is bad. But the hope of Christ and the hope of His resurrection, all right, makes these things not worthy to be compared to them. And the overall message of the gospel is this. This is the overall message of the gospel, the final message of the gospel, right? And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. That's the message of the gospel. That's what Christ came down to do. So yes, there's injustice, and yes, there's injustice in the suffering. But in the grand purpose of everything, grand scheme of things, Christ is at the end and He wipes away every single tear. So we're okay with it in this life, knowing that in the next life He will wipe away every single tear and everything will be okay. And glory be to God forever. Amen. I don't know if I have any time for questions, but I hope you guys took that in. All right. Maybe if there's any disagreements or any comments, I don't know, anything. Okay. A question? Yeah. Okay. Yes. What do you mean? Yeah. Yeah, very good. So what I mean by suffering is man-made is not that like man created cancer. What I'm saying is that when men plucked for themselves the sentence of death, that came with disease, and that came with the free will to kill and to murder. Okay? So from man plucking for himself the sentence of death, we get now the knowledge of good and evil. All right? We get death, we get suffering, which is unnatural to us. That's why you can't be uncomfortable. You can't be comfortable with death without Christ, right? It's a deeply unnatural thing because we're not built for that. We're built to live. So what happens is that when death comes into the world, it gives us disease, it gives us illness, it gives us ailments, it gives us the desire to kill, as you see in Cain and Abel. Any other questions? Yeah.
God allows suffering either to protect, correct, or perfect.
God allows suffering to protect, correct, or perfect. Here we go. Whatever. Thank you so much. Thank you, fathers, for having me. You received a big blessing. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.